Welcome to Career Practitioner Conversations. This podcast is presented by the National Career Development Association. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Melissa Venable, NCDA Director of Professional Development, and I am excited about this topic. I am here with Dr. Eric Hines and Angie Thompson. They are the current co-chairs of NCDA's Technology Committee, and we are all joined by Denise Lawson with Quality Information Partners.
Thank you, Melissa, for having us. On behalf of the NCDA Technology Committee, Angie Thompson, and myself, Eric Hines, I have a guest speaker today, Ms. Denise Lawson, who is here to talk with us about the title of our podcast, Skills You Can See, Data Literacy and Technology Innovations for Job Seekers, Employers, and Educational Institutions. So Denise, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experiences?
Thank you so much for inviting me to come and talk with you about these topics of data literacy. I have spent probably the last 30 years or so working in different areas, ranging from career exploration and planning to workforce planning to various aspects of data literacy and technology transformation, and how new tools can be used to help bridge the equity gap and also focus on skills-based hiring and advancement instead of just traditional degrees. So I'm really happy to be able to come and talk with you today and discuss these emerging topics.
I know, Denise, this is something that I've been even talking about in some of my classes, graduate school, training school counselors. Can you talk a little more about what data literacy may mean and what kind of the implications are for us knowing more about this?
Data literacy is one of those topics it's just very difficult to pinpoint what is data literacy, because what it is really depends on who you are and what you're trying to do. So looking at kind of the education to workforce ecosystem, I mean, there's so many different players. You have the education providers, the learner, worker, and the employer, and how people use data is different depending on their role. For example, you also have things like who's producing the data versus who's using the data. Right now, I'm actually working on creating a data literacy course focused on data producers and data users and the different perspectives that come into play. So if you're a data producer, you have to have all of those ethics in place on data quality. Where's your data coming from? How are you putting it together? How are you creating a visualization for other people to use? So whether it's communicating post-secondary outcomes data or graduation rates or all of the different types of data that come into play, really intentionally creating those visualizations in an ethical way so that the data are accurate and represent what you intend the data to represent. But then if you're the data user, you also have to think about the data in terms of asking the right questions. Who is the creator of the data? What is the source of the data? And you also have to be really cautious about causality. Just because you identify a particular trend, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can figure out the cause of that trend just by looking at a data table or a chart. Data literacy is very important, but you need to think of data literacy in the context of the work that you're performing. And especially if you're in those fields where you're actually working with students and helping to provide career guidance to students, really understanding where the data is coming from and helping your students understand how to accurately look at that data and interpret the data.
Well, thank you, Denise. I think once we understand that data literacy is not just about reading numbers, but also about asking the right questions and understanding where the information comes from, it really opens the door to a bigger conversation. So what are some of the emerging discussions happening right now around data and skills and the talent marketplace?
Well, in the talent marketplace, there's kind of a big shift from just focusing on traditional degrees, like what degrees do you have when thinking about what you're qualified to do, a shift towards more skills-based hiring and advancement, meaning, what skills maybe you've acquired not just through formal education, but it could also be through work experience or internships. It's understanding that you need specific skills to be able to perform a job. And sometimes a degree, like if you have a very specific educational degree, that might not necessarily mean you have the specific skills. And the focus on skills actually provides more opportunity for more people. Not everybody has a degree, but if you're able to think in terms of skills and really take all of the life skills and work skills that you have acquired through the different jobs you've had in the past, or sometimes when I'm talking with students, because I also teach in higher ed, you talk about what are the skills that you got from working somewhere. If you did an internship somewhere, were you able to take some new skills with you from that experience? And some of the trends that are coming up are, how do we share data around skills? There are lots of emerging technologies that are coming out where the focus is shifting towards those verifiable credentials and also ways for the learner worker to really start tracking and storing, thinking of it as a portfolio. So if you take that portfolio approach, that everything that you do, every job that you have, every educational experience, you can store or keep something about that in, now there are tools coming out called digital wallets that allow people to really create a lifelong portfolio of their skills and credentials that they can then choose to share with future employers and educational institutions as well. And these are some of the things that are kind of emerging that anyone who is advising students and workers need to just be aware of, that these tools are coming out and available for people to use.
Thank you, Denise. So I just wanted to follow up on that question. So why should job employers and counselors care about data literacy?
For employers and counselors, I mean, the data literacy part is very important. I mean, the counselors need to understand all of the tools and technologies that are available to the learners and the workers, and what are the systems that can help in the career exploration process. So being able to navigate those different systems and emerging technologies, that is another aspect of data literacy for both the career counselor and the learner or worker who's trying to shift towards providing a skills-based resume or a verifiable credential where the employer wants to know, can this person really perform? Do they really have the credential that they claim to have on their resume? So this shift towards having verifiable credentials means there's more trust in the sharing of information. So if you can have a resume, but you can also have a way to validate that what a person is asserting on their resume is actually accurate, that the issuer of a credential is valid and gave a person a specific credential, it just puts more trust in the system and makes it easier to share the information. So it's really looking at that the learner worker, the employer, and the education provider all participate in this ecosystem, and it creates trust when sharing information. So that's kind of a new, well, not entirely new, but another way of looking at data literacy in the ecosystem for sharing data.
That makes a lot of sense. I think if counselors and employers are going to use the data well, then we're also going to need to understand the tools that are becoming part of this work. And so I feel like a lot of people are hearing terms like digital wallets and credentials and badges and LERs, but they may not know what they actually mean. What types of digital tools are being used in the talent marketplace?
Well, I mean, that's a good question because there are a lot of tools out there. And one thing is some of the tools are targeted towards individuals, some are targeted towards institutions. So you have institutions, for example, it could be an educational provider, a college, university, who wants to issue verifiable credentials. They want to give that digital credential out. That's one use case for a technology for an issuer. You have employers who want to be able to ingest or receive the information that is provided by an issuer. So really what is happening, there are standards that are emerging. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but the topic of open standards and interoperability become very important because if you're going to share all of this information, the systems have to be compatible to be able to pass the information around. So that's kind of one aspect on the organizational side when organizations are looking at adopting technologies to enable them to work in the ways that they want to and utilize these concepts. On the individual side, it's a little bit different if an individual is looking at choosing some kind of a wallet tool. Just even conceptually, the tools that have been out there for a long time, whether it be LinkedIn. LinkedIn in a way functions as a way for someone to build an online resume, and you have different things like people can endorse you, not the same as having the trusted verifiable credential necessarily. But conceptually, people are starting to understand what can I gain by having a digital record of what I have done and the badges I've accumulated. So I think the shift is happening on multiple levels. And again, it's who you are in the ecosystem and what you're trying to do might influence what the type of platform or the type of tool. And there are a lot of emerging tools coming out and standards coming out. So it's just at this point being aware that there are standards and there are a lot of tools out there. So before making decisions, you have to be clear on what are you trying to do? Is the purpose and fit of the tool right for the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish, if that makes sense?
Definitely. When should an individual obtain an ALER or a digital wallet? And how early in their educational credentialing process should this begin?
Students, even a high school
Mhm,
student who might
mhm,
not think they've done a whole lot, but if
mhm.
they can start thinking in terms of creating that record, even knowing what you've done and starting to accumulate it, and then talking to their, career counselor in their school about what can they do to be more proactive in looking from a skills perspective. There's the thought process that always precedes the technology, right? So the technology is going to help store what we've done, but being able to look at the work that you've done, or sometimes it might be volunteer activities, and think of it if you were volunteering for a club in your school and organizing an event, what skills did you use to do that? So it's that coaching to have students and learner workers think in terms of what did I do? Actual actions. What did I do? And what skills did I use to do that? So in the example I just gave, obviously, if you were organizing an event, you had communication skills, planning skills, things that students sometimes are not aware of. They think, oh, I just did it. But no, you actually use skills to do it. And starting to think of your own narrative in terms of skills. And that's where counselors and educators can help coach the students to think in those types of ways about what they are doing and the skills that they are applying in not just academics or work, but sometimes other extracurricular activities that can also contribute and be stored in a digital wallet or other type of way of capturing that data.
I really appreciate this because when I'm working with my students, I have definitely encouraged them to upload things, even though LinkedIn isn't verified, just to have a record of, what they've done and maybe links to where employers can see where they got the badge. So I really do appreciate that, to have a foundation at least for them to take with them later, to remember later, because I feel like you do forget. As you keep moving on, you forget what you did in high school or, at certain jobs. So I really appreciate that because I feel like now that we have, a better sense of these tools, I want to kind of shift to the impact that they have. So one of the reasons people are excited about digital wallets is that they can show that learning, show that experience that might not appear on a traditional resume or on a transcript. So how can digital wallets kind of level the playing field and help develop a pipeline of talent to get to the right career pathways to continue lifelong learning?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it on the head. It's just not always going to be in a degree. If you're just focusing on the degree or you're focusing on the job title or sometimes even a very generic occupational description, you're not always capturing things at the skill level. And the digital wallet enables you to see at a more detailed level, like if somebody got a specific certificate or a badge that is verifiable, it allows you to see that and recognize that and acknowledge that. And again, for students who may not go the traditional route of a 4-year college, it still recognizes the value of the achievements and skills that a person has, or if they got a certificate or they got a digital badge for completing something. It puts all of that in a way where somebody can share it kind of like a portfolio. So if you think, someone in an art career, they have a portfolio and they're able to show what they've done. So it takes that philosophy and enables people to do that. But also from the perspective of those who work with learners and workers and try to bridge that gap, the talent gap from the learner worker to the workplace and the employer. All of these tools can really help. You mentioned talent pipeline management. All of these tools can help build the pipeline. So when employers start to think about not just the occupation, but the skills that are needed, and if they start to use the same language for skills, the skills frameworks that education providers are also using, and you're really getting to understand what skills are needed to perform in an occupation. And when you start capturing things at the skill level, you can better identify the match or adjust a program to say, hey, we need more of a pipeline for a particular skill to be able to meet these industry or workforce demands. So really moving in that direction. And if everyone in the ecosystem is doing it, it can result in better outcomes for everyone, but also a way to measure those outcomes, to be able to look back and see, okay, well, students who went through this particular program and obtained these skills, and maybe they did a dual enrollment program and they got additional skills outside of their high school, maybe that better prepared them for the workplace. But being able to have those data points is also part of it. If you're capturing that, then you're not just looking at the degree. And when you start to see, well, maybe there's variability across everybody who got a traditional degree, but if you have more information attached to that career pathway, it makes for better informed decision making for everyone.
I have one last question I would love to kind of close us out on, Denise. So recently, there has been conversation on shortening the length to degree conferral at a lot of colleges. What would these emerging tools look like over the next 5 years now that this conversation is happening around We need to ensure that students are getting credentials that are more affordable, that gets them to the workforce faster, but also thinking about how do we retool individuals in the space of artificial intelligence.
Wow. Okay, that's a big question. There's a lot in that question. Well, I mean, really, right now, I think there are a lot of opportunities to have a lot more efficiency. I think one thing you just touched on, artificial intelligence. So careers are changing. The nature of careers are changing. The skills that are required are changing. You know, the AI question is always a big question, right? But how is AI changing how people work? And depending on the industry you work in, it can be very different. But the skills that are going to be needed to have ethical, effective use of AI for careers also means that how we educate will also need to change, and being able to tap into, keep a finger on the pulse of the industries and how they're changing with technology. Again, it kind of circles back to that whole data literacy thing, right? And where can technology be effectively provided to accelerate the learning curve, accelerate when a person can be fully functioning? If you look at, you mentioned kind of the concept of upskilling, right? So how do you know what skills, if you're an employer, how do you keep your workforce so that they're continually upskilling to be able to adapt to whatever changes are happening? And I think all of those things, it's that whole having a better tie-in between what people actually need to know to do the work and the education or work experience or on the job training. What do they need to be able to do, and how are they going to develop those competencies to be able to upskill to perform at the next level in the next cycle, and being able to have a little bit more of a predictive model to see here's the trajectory that this is going in, regardless of the specific career field. But I mean, every career field has certain knowledge, skills, and abilities that somebody needs to have, and then they're entry level, journeyman, and advanced. But then you throw AI into the mix, and where can AI help, and how do you effectively do that is a whole nother skill set. And that is, a whole nother part of data literacy is how do you effectively leverage AI to be able to help move things forward and help close the gap between education and workforce. Because, traditionally, a lot of times there's a lag. There's what the workforce needs, and then education needs to shift curriculum, open enough spaces. You have to have the slots so you can teach the people so they come out with the right skills. So that labor market side of estimating the future demand and adjusting, it's a complete cycle that has to happen. And hopefully technology can help us do a better job of predicting future need, and then also giving people the right skills, enabling, capturing those skills, and promoting the skills, and doing the upskilling to stay relevant in the changing workforce.
So I wasn't going to say anything else, but since you mentioned AI, I was just thinking part of my job as the assistant director of education is testing AI platforms. And so I recently had Google make a resume for me, find jobs that match that resume, and even fill out a job application and see how well it would do. And what I noticed is that it provided a whole bunch of credentials that I didn't have. And it said, when I asked, why did you do that? It said it's going to give you the edge, against your competitors. So trust becomes a major part of this conversation, because if people are going to store and share and rely on digital credentials, then they need to know that the system and the credentials, are legitimate. So how can, if someone tell if a platform is trustworthy and not a scam? And how can a business or career counselor really verify the legitimacy of that skill or credential or badge?
Well, those are all excellent questions. And, the one thing too, right now, we can't forget about the human in the loop, right? Whatever you put into an AI system, what you get out, might not always be 100% correct. So you can't rely 100% on the AI technology. As far as the, wanting to know that you're sharing with legitimate organizations and how you're sharing your data, there are registries, trusted, verifiable credential registries, and these are growing, but they have processes in place and standards in place to ensure that organizations that are in the registry have been verified as trustable. And that is an important part of this whole process is, that trust and verification. If you don't have that, it's, creates risk, right? Because you want things to be verifiable. That's where the verifiable part comes in as very important. And really, humans, as the stewards of all of this, it's, you can't leave the human factor out. So people who think you're going to solve, whether it's, workforce gaps, or you're not going to solve everything by pushing an AI button and saying, match this resume with these job requirements. You might get suggestions, but you can't take the person out of the loop. Really understanding what the job requirements are and how those are changing and how a specific person matches. So never forget the person, the human in all of this.
Thank you.
As we close, are there any considerations that career practitioners should think about when we engage or discuss or consider using data literacy, particularly when it comes to the use of learner employment records and digital wallets?
I mean, my advice would be to make sure you're aware of the technologies that are out there, the technologies that are emerging. There are different vendors who are coming out with different things. As always happens, you can have some that are stovepiped, and then you end up in that kind of, okay, you're stuck with a vendor because their tool is not interoperable with other tools. And, that's why I was kind of bringing up the concepts of open source and recognized standards. So I would encourage, as organizations are adopting technologies, to always make sure to look at those types of aspects. And then for individual career counselor practitioners, being aware that these things are out there is important, just so that you can help your students or workers, could be people transitioning later in their careers, but thinking in terms of skills and skills frameworks, and being able to, as the learner worker, being able to really hone your skill in identifying the skills that you have, because that in and of itself is a skill. And I think recognizing that skills are as important as the actual degree that you might have, and then thinking towards the ways of building a portfolio. Because again, it's kind of like the mental practice that needs to come almost before the technology adoption. And even if you're just keeping, like you, Angie, you had mentioned, just creating your own portfolio, whether it's on LinkedIn or even, there are platforms like the Project Management Institute, someone who has a PMP. There are all kinds of tools over there to grow your skills in particular areas and track what courses you've taken. Doing those types of things helps you put things all in one place so that later, if you do adopt a digital wallet, you have already created your repository and you have thought about your work activities in terms of skill, and you're able to build your wallet in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. I really do feel like this has helped me at least understand a little bit more, it gave us a clearer picture of what data literacy really is and what it means in today's marketplace and why it matters for learners and seekers and counselors. So I'm really appreciative. I know I understand more. So thank you so much. Really appreciate this.
Yes, I echo Angie too, just learning more and actually taking more back to inform my work as a practitioner and a researcher in the career space about the use of learner employment records and digital wallets. So thank you, Denise. We appreciate your expertise and experience in this area.
And thank you so much for inviting me to come and talk with you about these topics. It's always important to be looking at what's coming next to help people in the career development space. And we appreciate everything that National Career Development Association does to really set the tone for how people can move forward and make improvements in this area. Thank you.